How's it going? Jasper from Idea here. Today, let me walk you guys through a couple best practices to optimize the image inputs when working with AI image to 3D generative models. It's a very exciting time to use generative 3D models these days. There are a bunch of options that you can select on the market, but one thing that's true for all of the generative 3D models out there is that garbage in, garbage out. So your image inputs directly impact the generated 3D model's quality. Without further ado, let's jump into our tip number 1, which is when you provide the concept images, the input images, you want to avoid harsh lighting and special effects. So when you are generating those concept images, make sure you tell the generative AI model that you don't want any special effect, and this is a game 3D asset, and remove any harsh lighting to simply use a flat color to best represent the actual model's texture and form. If you provided an input image with very harsh lighting, part of the model is going to be completely dark or very, very dark, which is hard for AI models to actually figure out what the color is without the lighting effect, right? So when the models comes out, you will see that they will have the right color as some part of the model, and some color is and some part of the model is completely pitch dark or a very dark color, which does not truly represent the color you want for your 3D model, right? So you want to avoid that. And if you added special effects, for example, you're creating some mystical creatures, and then they have like particle effects, they have flame effects on the model. You don't want to have that because they will create all kind of weird meshes that's connected to the main model, and you will spend a lot more time just to clean up those weird meshes, which is not ideal. And tip number 2 is use something like Google Gemini 2.0's image generation capability or ChatGPT 4.0's new image generation capability to generate multiple angles of your concept. So you can come up with a very, very nice front view of your concept first, and use Gemini or ChatGPT to help you imagine the backside or the side view of the same concept. With that, when you provide those multiple angles to a generative 3D model such as Trellis, such as Hunyuan, they have more information to work with in terms of how the back is looking like and how the side is looking like. And one crucial thing at this step is when you're generating those multiple angles, make sure it is a very iterative process, and make sure you check on different angles, everything is still coherent, so you're not providing conflicting information to the generative 3D model. What I mean is, if you have a character that is wearing a gauntlet on one side, but on the other side the hand is bare, it doesn't have any costume on it, make sure it's coherent when the model is turned around. On the back side, it's still the same hand that's wearing the gauntlet and the same hand that's bare, instead of like sometimes when AI is helping you to imagine the backside, they kind of flipped the information around. So make sure you check everything looks coherent on different sides, so that when you provide those input images, you're not confusing the generative 3D model by providing conflicting information. And tip number 3 is specifically when you are working with characters, make sure when you're generating the concept, use T pose or A pose. The benefit of it is you can easily rig the generated model for animation, for game use very easily afterwards. And also you avoid the cases where when the pose is weird, when things are overlapping, the AI does not know how to properly set up the mesh. So for example, if you have a character it's holding the hand in front of the face, the pose could be very dynamic in a sense that it's a very cool concept image. But when you have overlapping body parts, it's hard for AI to work out which parts are connected. So sometimes the hand would be attached to the face part of the mesh, and that's not what you want, and you spend way more time, or sometimes impossible, to actually fix those models and turn them into a T-pose later on. So when you're working with character and when you're generating those concepts, make sure you ask for a T-pose or A pose. And tip number 4, when you're working with a very complex character or complex environment prop with a bunch of different components, a bunch of different parts, what ideally you want to do is once you generated the final concept, you start picking out different parts, segment your concept into smaller pieces, smaller key pieces, so you can generate them separately. The way to think about it is generative 3D models only help you generate a specific mesh in a specific resolution. It doesn't matter if it's a polygon count or the texture dimension. It only output at a specific size. So the more parts you have on your concept means that each part will enjoy less resolution, less quality. Tip number 5 is that if you're working with a realistic human character or human head, the best way to do it is actually to turn that image into a sculpture style first, and then generate the mesh based on that sculpture image. And you can worry about the texturing later with a tool such as Ideate. And the reason is because almost all of the generative 3D models, when they are trained, they carry less training data set that's directly a human photo to 3D model, right? So it carries more training data set where it is a photoreal sculpture of a human into a 3D model. So this is basically based on our trials and errors. Sometimes it could work, but what we have seen is that if you use a sculpture style input image to generate the mesh quality is way higher, and you can leverage an AI texture paint tool such as Ideate to help you get the texture onto the model later. And tip number 6, it is a bit similar to the tip number 1 in terms of like removing special effect and lighting. What you want to make sure is that you have a clean background on your input images. Almost all of the 3D generative model on the tool side or on the model side, they will actually have a step to segment the main subject from your concept images. So what you want to do is you make sure the background is clean with no artifacts, with no distracting details. So when they actually segment that part, the main subject, it is a clean segmentation, rather than if you have different, some weird details, which will come out as weird meshes when the AI generate the model for you. So you want to avoid that by providing clean background with no distracting details. And tip number 7, very important, when you're working with AI, always treat it as a very iterative process. Don't see it as a process, it's just like a one-shot and you're done. And don't try to get to production level with just these one-shot generative process. Spend the time to iterate on your input images, and once you have gotten the model, spend the time to leverage tools such as an AI texture painter like IDA or like a 3D software to actually clean up the mesh, to actually clean up the texture until you actually use them for production. Always remember, it should be an iterative process when you're working with AI, and you will have a better time and more enjoyable time if you have this mindset of an iterative process, rather than expecting a one-shot get to 100% right away. And this is it. These are our best practices when you're working with an image to 3D workflow, regardless what generative 3D model you are using. So spend the time to work on the best input images to guide the AI to come out with the best mesh quality and texture quality. And always remember to iterate on the results you have before you use them in your production. And my name is Jasper from Ideate. Until next time, ciao.